All right, so Washington is pissed off that Ohio State canceled their home-and-home series with them in 2024 and 2025. This has led to speculation that maybe Washington and Oregon are joining the Big Ten. Why would Ohio State cancel it? They're eating $500,000 because they're canceling this series. Is it just for an extra home game? I'm going to talk about all of this, give it a full breakdown, and tell you guys why this was pretty much inevitable, Ohio State canceling this home and home with Washington due to the Buckeyes' 2025 non-conference schedule. First thing I wanted to say is I wanted to kind of talk about this article because Washington right now, is very angry. It does screw them. They absolutely have a right to be angry. You take a look at their 2024 and 2025 non-conference schedule. It's terrible. If you lose Ohio State, very, very hard to replace at this point and find a legit Power 5 opponent in both 2024 and 2025. So their non-conference schedules are going to be really bad for those 2 years probably, unless some Hail Mary happens. I know there were a few fans speculating maybe Oklahoma might be a team because you had Georgia back out of their home and home with Oklahoma in 2024, but it's going to be very hard. So this is a pretty good exclamation of probably what happened. It's more likely that Ohio State did not want to do a second West Coast trip in the same season with UCLA and USC joining the Big Ten. Ohio State does not want to do 2 long road trips. That is, kind of speculating on why Ohio State decided to cancel this home and home. My number one thing on why the Buckeyes canceled this, if you take a look at Ohio State's 2025 non-conference schedule, it's Texas and UConn, and it would have also been Washington. So if you're Ohio State, you're possibly in 2025, if you keep that Washington home and home, you're possibly facing Washington, Texas, USC if they come up on the schedule, Penn State, Michigan, and maybe Wisconsin. There's just no way any team is going to do that. Also, people saying Ohio State wants the extra home game. I mean, that could be it as well. They want more money. But in reality, I think the main thing here is Ohio State doesn't want 2 non-conference games that are that tough, like at Washington and versus Texas, although theoretically, in the day and age we're at now, especially in 2025, where we have the 12-team playoff, you can lose multiple games and still make the playoffs. You would hope that's really not a big thing. We've also got massive speculation that this is kind of a prelude to Washington and Oregon possibly joining the Big Ten. The first thing I want to say about that is absolutely I think that's going to happen. Anytime you have situations like this with teams joining conferences, it's all about the money. And you look at the Pac-12 right now, and I thought this article or this headline did a very good job at summarizing college football expansion. One school is out of Pac-12 contention. Rice will not be a member of the Pac-12. This just shows you the dire straits the Pac-12 seems to be in right now when it comes to their situation. And for Oregon and Washington, from a financial side, there's just so much of an incentive to try and get into the Big Ten. The first time they get offered, they're going to jump at it and they're going to join. Maybe that could also be at play why Ohio State would say, we want to cancel with Washington, eat the fee, get the extra home game, and Washington might already be in the conference by 2025. Who knows? The other thing I wanted to talk about, conference realignment, Pac-12 implosion, could result in massive gains for the Big 12. Well, it would result in gains for the Big 12, but more importantly, the Big 10. If the Pac-12 implosion actually happens, you're looking at the Big 10 adding minimum Washington and Oregon. You can see it says interest has picked up considerably with the Pac-12 appearing even more vulnerable. The Big 12 commissioner wants to have membership in the Pacific time zone. That would make the Big 12 the only conference to have members across all 4 time zones. So, this article hinting at if the Pac-12 does get crushed, you're looking at possibly the Big 12 picking up a team like Utah, Colorado, Oregon State maybe, although I think Oregon State would probably go to the Mountain West In this article, it has Washington and Oregon both to the Big Ten, which seems very likely. If Washington and Oregon are going anywhere, it's going to be to the Big Ten. Financially, it's too good, and recent numbers from the Pac-12 and their whole TV negotiations are an absolute mess. I mean, without USC and UCLA, those numbers are not good. I think it's like $36 million per year or something like that, when you've got Big Ten teams possibly at around $100 million per year in TV money. And then I thought this was kind of random and interesting. It has Stanford going to the Mountain West Conference in a merger with them. And I'm guessing if the Pac-12 just completely dissolves, which is what we were kind of talking about last summer, the idea is like Stanford, Oregon State, Washington State would possibly head to the Mountain West, and then a fourth team would go to the Mountain West. There's also rumors that Stanford is wanted by the Big Ten due to their academics, and, Stanford, I'm sure, would be very intrigued with possibly going to the Big Ten because of the situation surrounding the financial, the money and the amount that they would make joining the Big Ten. So, this is all at play right now. We'll have to see what happens when it comes to Ohio State canceling with Washington. I can definitely understand why Washington is very upset. If people don't know, Washington also had Wisconsin cancel a home and home with them a few years ago. They also had issues with the Michigan home and home, where Michigan never made their return trip because of the pandemic, and Washington just played that game in Ann Arbor and got crushed. So they've had some real bad luck scheduling home and homes with Big Ten teams. It's not a great look for Ohio State. I would completely understand it if Ohio State wanted to do this, when you look at the fact they're already facing Texas non-conference. If the college football playoff was only 4 teams, but with it expanding to 12 teams, you're looking at a massive amount of wiggle room. I mean, if Ohio State has a really hard non-conference, let's say they lose one game in conference, they go 1-1 against Texas and Washington, they're going to have, a lot of wiggle room, because that's a very hard non-conference schedule. This is the thing we were trying to avoid, and we thought it would incentivize teams to play more of these non-conference schedules where you're facing 2 hard teams in non-conference play. So certainly if you're Washington, you've got to be very frustrated by this development. Now you're looking at non-conference schedules in 2024 and 2025 that are terrible, because the expectation was you were going to get the cream of the crop with Ohio State and 2 cupcakes. Well, you still have the 2 cupcakes, but now that Ohio State cancels, especially 2024, you're this late in the process. Can you really find a legitimate Power 5 team to do a home and home with you in 2024 and 2025? It becomes very hard, because so many of these teams set the home and homes 5, 6, 7 years in advance. There's definitely a frustration. This could certainly be a thing where Ohio State thinks Washington was going to join the conference in the next few years, so there's no reason. But then again, why would you bite the bullet on $500,000, lose that money? I guess maybe they really want this extra home game, in the coming years, and that's why they do it. Ohio State's 2024 non-conference schedule is probably going to be really weak, because Washington was their big Power 5 team, but the 2025 non-conference schedule should still be, decent enough, because they start their home and home with Texas. So that is the current situation on both Ohio State and Washington, and the cancellation and the speculation that Washington is going to join the Big Ten, and all of these things are fueled by money. Expansion, realignment, it's all fueled by money, and there's just such a ridiculous financial incentive for Oregon and Washington to both push to the Big Ten. It's just a matter of if the Big Ten wants to expand or not. What's the situation with the Pac-12? And that's really what it all comes down to. Also, you have the travel. Kevin Warren, I know he's not with the Big Ten anymore, but he did make sense when he said he wanted a West Wing, which would mitigate the massive travel issues and disadvantages that USC and UCLA would face, where they would be traveling cross country 5 or 6 times a year. Now, if you have a West Wing, you could really mitigate travel because you could have Oregon face USC, and that would be a Big Ten game, and those two teams would barely be traveling. You could also have multiple home games in a row for USC, and then they travel and have 2 straight away games. It would just make a lot more sense if the Big Ten went with the West Wing and they added teams like Washington and Oregon. There's also been the speculation that, again, maybe Stanford and California, due to the academics, would be 2 other members the Big Ten would look to add. But right now, I'll just say the 2 main teams to watch are Washington and Oregon when it comes to the Big Ten, and then also the Big 12. Really intrigued, really sticking their head in the ring for possibly getting some of those leftover teams in the Pac-12, specifically Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah. That was the speculation in the summer. We will see if that ends up happening. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.